We have recovered a crashed UFO in more than one occasion. Unusual vectors, speed, being able to hover and move. And we saw this little white tic-tac looking object. Dude. It's rotating. Joe Rogan's going absolutely nuts over Congress. Finally dropping this UFO footage they've been hiding from us forever. He's diving deep into these military encounters where these things are moving in ways that just shouldn't be possible. Like they're mocking our understanding of physics. Rogan's piecing together testimonies, leaked footage, and official statements that basically confirm we're not dealing with human technology here. The dude's asking all the questions we've been thinking, but we're afraid to say, what else are they hiding? Who's really flying these things? The historic moment that changed everything. Something absolutely unprecedented happened in Washington, D.C. that most people never thought they would live to see. On a Wednesday morning that started like any other, members of Congress sat down in a government hearing room and had the most serious conversation about UFOs that has ever taken place in American history. This was not some late-night conspiracy theory discussion or fringe meeting. This was sworn testimony under oath from military personnel with impeccable credentials who had actually encountered these mysterious objects in our sky. The hearing room was packed capacity. People had traveled from around the world just to witness this moment, including someone who flew all the way from Denmark specifically for this event. The atmosphere was electric with tension and anticipation. For decades, anyone who dared to talk about UFOs publicly was laughed at, dismissed, or labeled as crazy. But here were respected military officers sitting at official congressional tables, speaking under oath about their encounters with objects that seemed to break every law of physics we understand. Representative Tim Burchett from Tennessee, who helped organize this historic hearing, made it crystal clear from the very beginning that this was not about little green men or flying saucers from science fiction movies. This was about government transparency, national security, and the right of the American people to know what their government knows. He talked about how incredibly difficult it had been just to get to this point, facing constant roadblocks from intelligence agencies and the Pentagon at every step of the way. The fact that this hearing was even happening felt like a miracle to many people who had been waiting their entire lives for the government to take this topic seriously. The stakes could not have been higher for everyone involved. These were not random people making wild claims on internet forums. These were trained military observers whose entire careers were built on accurately identifying aircraft and potential threats. Their professional reputations and personal credibility were on the line. Yet they chose to speak up anyway, knowing full well that they might face ridicule, career damage, or even personal retaliation for telling their stories. The courage it took for them to sit at that table cannot be overstated. The three men who risked everything. 3 individuals sat at the witness table that day, each carrying decades of distinguished military service and credentials that would be impossible to question. Lieutenant Ryan Graves, a former Navy F-18 Super Hornet pilot, had seen things during routine training missions that he simply could not explain using any known technology. Commander David Fravor, a retired Navy squadron leader with an impeccable service record, was the central figure in what many experts consider the most credible UFO encounter in recorded history. David Grouch, a former senior intelligence officer who had worked at the highest levels of government, had spent years investigating these phenomena officially and was now ready to blow the whistle on what he had discovered. These were absolutely not the kind of people you would expect to see discussing UFOs in any context. Lieutenant Graves had flown dangerous combat missions in both Afghanistan and Iraq, putting his life on the line for his country. Commander Fravor was a Top Gun pilot who had commanded entire fighter squadrons and trained the next generation of naval aviators. David Grush had worked deep inside the intelligence community with access to some of the most highly classified information in the entire government. All three had sworn oaths to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. But something had pushed each of them their comfort zones and forced them to break their silence. For Graves, it was watching his fellow pilots encounter genuinely dangerous situations with unidentified objects in controlled airspace and having absolutely nowhere safe to report what they had witnessed. For Fravor, it was finally being contacted by serious investigators who took his incredible 2004 encounter seriously instead of dismissing it. For Grush, it was learning about secret programs that he believed were operating completely outside of proper congressional oversight and potentially violating federal law. The personal cost of speaking out had been very real for all three men. Grush openly admitted that he had faced what he called brutal retaliation for his decision to become a whistleblower, including serious threats to his personal safety and coordinated professional attacks designed to silence him permanently. He even suggested that people had been physically harmed or potentially killed to keep these secrets hidden, though he could only discuss those details in a classified setting. The other witnesses also described how the intense stigma surrounding this topic had negatively affected their careers and personal relationships in ways that continued to this day. The encounter that defied all known physics. Commander Fravor's detailed account of what happened on November 14, 2004 sounds like it came straight out of a science fiction movie, except for one crucial difference. It actually happened and multiple military personnel witnessed it. He was leading what should have been a routine training exercise off the coast of San Diego when his squadron was suddenly redirected to investigate something that the USS Princeton had been tracking on radar for 2 solid weeks. These objects would drop down from above 80,000 feet, which is technically space, hover around 20,000 feet for hours at a time, and then shoot straight back up into space in a matter of seconds. When Fravor and his wingmen arrived at the coordinates they had been given, they encountered something that completely defied explanation. Below them, about 50 feet above the ocean's surface, was a perfectly white oblong object approximately 40 feet in length. It looked exactly like a giant tic-tac mint, which is how the object got its now famous nickname. The craft had no wing, no visible propulsion system, no cockpit windows, and no external features whatsoever. It was completely smooth and pristine white, unlike anything in the inventory of any known military. What happened next was even more extraordinary than the initial sighting. As Fravor began descending to get a closer look at this mysterious object, it seemed to become aware of his presence and react accordingly. The tic-tac rotated to point directly toward his aircraft and began climbing toward him. The two aircraft entered into what Fravor described as a kind of aerial dance, spiraling around each other in a display that suggested the object was under intelligent control. Then, without any warning or visible means of propulsion, the tic-tac accelerated at impossible speeds and simply vanished from sight. But the encounter was far from over. Less than a minute after the object disappeared, air traffic controllers informed Fravor that the same object had reappeared at their predetermined rendezvous point, which was roughly 60 miles away. The mathematics of that kind of movement are staggering. To travel 60 miles in under a minute would require speeds that should be physically impossible for any craft operating in Earth's atmosphere. Multiple independent radar systems tracked the entire sequence of events, and 4 sets of trained military eyes witnessed the encounter firsthand, making this one of the most well-documented UFO incidents in history. A culture of fear and professional suicide. One of the most shocking revelations to emerge from the hearing was the toxic culture of silence and fear that surrounds UAP encounters throughout both military and civilian aviation communities. Lieutenant Graves painted a disturbing picture of pilots who regularly encounter these objects, but have essentially no safe way to report what they see without potentially destroying their careers. The stigma attached to UFO sightings is so powerful and pervasive that the vast majority of encounters go completely unreported, creating a massive blind spot in our understanding of how often these incidents actually occur. Commercial airline pilots find themselves in an especially impossible situation. Unlike military pilots who at least have some limited reporting mechanisms available to them, civilian pilots have essentially no official channels for reporting UAP encounters. They face the very real fear that coming forward with such reports will result in losing their jobs, being permanently grounded by management, or failing their annual medical and psychological evaluations that are required to maintain their flying credentials. The unspoken message from airline companies is brutally clear. If you see something strange up there, the best thing you can do for your career is to forget about it immediately and never mention it to anyone. This conspiracy of silence creates an incredibly dangerous situation for aviation safety that affects every person who flies. Pilots are encountering unknown objects in controlled airspace that can interfere with aircraft systems and create serious collision hazards. Yet, they have no way to share this critical safety information with other pilots or with air traffic controllers. Each pilot who has an encounter is left to deal with it completely alone, unable to warn others who might face the same risks in the same airspace. It is like having icebergs in shipping lanes but forbidding ship captains from reporting their locations to anyone else. Graves founded an organization called Americans for Safe Aerospace specifically to provide a safe haven for pilots who want to report their encounters without fear of professional retaliation. More than 30 military and commercial aviators have already come forward to share their experiences through this organization, and almost 5,000 Americans have joined to support transparency on this critical issue. However, these numbers likely represent only a tiny fraction of the actual encounters that are happening on a regular basis, hidden by a wall of fear and professional intimidation that serves no one's interests except those who want to keep the truth buried. The government's most explosive secret programs. David Guss's testimony opened a door that the government had been desperately trying to keep locked and sealed for many decades. As a former senior intelligence officer who had been specifically tasked with investigating UAPs as part of his official government duties, he had been granted access to information that very few people in the world ever get to see. What he discovered during his authorized investigation shocked him so profoundly that he decided to risk his career, his security clearance, and his personal safety to become a whistleblower and bring this information to Congress and the American people. According to Grusa's sworn testimony, the United States government has been operating secret crash retrieval programs for multiple decades. These programs, he claimed under oath, have successfully recovered both intact and partially intact vehicles that are of non-human origin. During his 4-year investigation, he personally interviewed more than 40 witnesses who had direct first-hand knowledge of these programs. Many of these witnesses had provided detailed information and evidence to congressional intelligence committees in classified setting. But the broader Congress and the American people had been kept completely in the dark. The most explosive claim was still to come. Brush testified that some of these recovered vehicles came with what he carefully described as non-human biologics when pressed by lawmakers about what exactly that meant. He confirmed that these were the physical remains of beings that were definitively not human. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe channel.